Items are transported between areas using certain vehicles. Then there are cars that truly alter the course of history. Most people in post-war Britain rarely paid any attention to the pug-nosed little van parked outside the bakery, speeding down the tight lane with the morning milk, or resting peacefully at the curbside as a nurse emerged with her bag. They simply saw it as a natural element, as permanent and commonplace as a red phone box or a terraced house. But there was something extraordinary hidden behind that small van. It was one of the most socially significant automobiles to ever come from a British manufacturer because of its pressed steel body, which offered a story of quiet revolution, post-war ambition, and adaptability. This is Bedford, California, and what you are about to discover will change the way you think about it forever. Britain was still undergoing rebuilding in 1952. Rationing has just recently come to an end. The country needed a car that could deliver, travel, and function reliably and affordably. The men at Bedford's Luton facility understood that need better than others. While studying rivals like the Morris J-Type and Ford Thames, Bedford began creating the CA in the late 1940s with a goal of offering slightly more loadroom while preserving easy maneuverability for usage in Britain's many narrow lanes, many of which date back to pre-medieval times. The CA was more than simply a van when it finally debuted at the 1952 Commercial Motor Show. It was a reaction to a national necessity. And this is the first thing that shocks the majority of folks who think they know this car. Because it was so ubiquitous and could be found in every British town, county, and street corner. The Bedford CA was known as the Ford Transit of its time. But it wasn't until 1965 that the Transit began to run. The CA had already been carrying out that role for 13 years. Before anyone else had even sketched the concept on paper, it subtly established the benchmark for what a British light commercial van should be. It was over a decade ahead of the legendary Ford workhorse. The timing is crucial. That precedent is crucial. But history has effectively elevated the Transit to the top, putting the CA in the background. That injustice is the first shock, and we're just getting started. The design team decided on a semi-forward control plan, placing the driver's seat above the front axle, to optimize luggage room in the back without making the van unduly lengthy. Its engineering was very clever for the time. The result was a car that felt incredibly roomy inside despite its little size. A psychological trick of design that made the CA appear more powerful than it actually was. 10 to 1200 weight and 1500 weight versions of the CA were manufactured, as well as short wheelbase and long wheelbase models. That flexibility wasn't accidental. Bedford intended the CA to be a platform rather than just a product from the start. What builders and converters accomplished with that platform is the really remarkable portion of the story. One of the few commercial vehicles that can genuinely claim to have had an impact on social history is the Bedford CA. In 1952, it initiated the post-war camper van movement. Think about that for a moment. The British camping trip did not originate from a sophisticated touring car. It was only a delivery truck. Eventually, Kent-based coach builders Martin Walter developed the fully equipped Doormobile because they thought it was the best choice for their multifunctional conversions that could be used as a van, estate car, minibus, and overnight sleeper. By outfitting the CA with a pop-up top, fold-down beds, and tiny cooking facilities, they, together with the Volkswagen Type 2, contributed to the development of post-war camping culture in Britain and Europe, transforming the humble work van into a popular weekend and vacation vehicle. Thanks to the Bedford CA Doormobile, working families could now travel wherever the road led, with a bed and a kettle waiting at the other end. That is not merely a simple fact. That is accurate in terms of social liberty. However, the following discovery is more significant than most auto historians would like to admit, so stay tuned. The original CA was powered by a 1.5-litre overhead valve 4-cylinder engine that produced 49 brake horsepower. The same engine and 3-speed transmission were also found in the Vauxhall F-Series Victor passenger car. In other words, a working van and a family saloon shared a mechanical heart, which meant that parts were easily accessible, mechanics knew the engines, and small businesses could still afford repairs. Instead of being lazy, This shared platform strategy was clever. It ensured the CA's viability across cost-conscious fleets for the rest of its production life. But that engine had a secret of its own. Any Bedford CA with a 3-speed gearbox can easily be upgraded to a 4-speed gearbox from later FC series vehicles, which was subsequently offered as a factory option. Owners who were aware of this may simply update their van's capabilities without buying a new vehicle. This is a kind of mechanical upgrade path that seems almost modern in its logic. Another facet of the CA's industrial life that directly affects the sphere of British public service is entirely ignored by most people. The Bedford CA quickly became the standard light commercial vehicle for many fleets throughout Britain. They were used extensively by the Royal Mail, police, and emergency services. Utility businesses, local retailers, and newspapers all relied on CAS for daily distribution. It wasn't an accident. It was the result of a car that was so dependable and reasonably priced that public institutions trusted it with life or death tasks. Ambulance conversions used high roof extensions on the CA van for patient transport in post-war designs that valued medical equipment and quick access. Standard models could accommodate up to 6-seated cases, while other types could accommodate 4 stretchers. It's possible that the same van that carried your morning post also drove your neighbor to the hospital. That duality, that modest, everyday heroism, is one of the most overlooked facets of this vehicle's legacy. We have now come to an understanding that once heard, cannot be reversed. One of the most well-known uses of the CA was in the 1960s, when businesses like Morrison Electrofreeze of Southampton modified thousands of ice cream vans with all-glass front designs for vendor visibility and chilled units powered by the van's engine. It's possible that the same van that carried your morning post also drove your neighbor to the hospital. That duality, that modest, everyday heroism, is one of the most overlooked facets of this vehicle's legacy. We have now come to an understanding that once heard, cannot be reversed. One of the most well-known uses of the CA was in the 1960s, when businesses like Morrison Electrofreeze of Southampton modified thousands of ice cream vans with all-glass front designs for vendor visibility and chilled units powered by the van's engine. It is impossible to overstate the importance of this vehicle to people. Not just a machine, a memory, a life. This is a very different kind of shock that demonstrates the CA's impact outside of Britain. The CA was marketed as the Envoy CA and shipped to Canada as part of the Envoy brand lineup. They were available in Canada from 1957 to 1963 before British cultural influence began to wane and American rivals like the Chevrolet sport van made the imported British van increasingly difficult to defend in the North American market. After crossing an ocean, the CA tried to raise its flag on a continent that was moving in a whole different direction. The fact that it tried and found that buyers were willing to choose a quirky Luton-built van over domestically produced American competitors speaks much about the vehicle's personality and the cultural confidence of its period, even though it failed to win Canada. The CA's overall appearance hardly changed during its 17-year construction. In a market where yearly model upgrades and cosmetic refreshes were the primary marketing tools, Bedford's austerity approach to the CA was almost philosophical. Over the course of its existence, it was offered in 3 distinct versions, each with slight but noteworthy enhancements. A vertical metal split in the middle separated the 2 separate flat glass sheets that made up the original cast 2-piece windscreen. When curved glass became more affordable in Britain, the split screen was replaced by a slightly curved single unit. The third model, which debuted in late 1964, had a significantly deeper windscreen and the first pressed aluminum alloy front grille. Every change was pragmatic rather than fashionable, with an emphasis on continuous, gradual development rather than radical reinvention. Bedford didn't follow trends. It was hearing from the men and women who relied on the CA every day and drove. This brings us to the final and, in many ways, most unsettling reality. The CA was affectionately called the Tilly and had a very long production life with very few changes. Production stopped in 1969 when the Bedford CF replaced it. The CF had independent front suspension for improved handling and was designed to directly compete with the Ford Transit, which was becoming more and more powerful. The transit would win that battle handily. In the decades that followed, the CA, which was once ubiquitous on every street and lane in Britain, actually became rare. Someone's choice to conserve, repair, and maintain these vehicles is what has allowed them to live. Approximately 370,000 Bedford Cass were produced during its 17-year production cycle. Nowadays, very few of those remain. In addition to rust and traffic, each of them is a survivor of forgetting, of a society that continued without pausing to say goodbye to the little pug-nosed van that had served it so faithfully. It was never a glamorous spot in Bedford, California. It was never fast. It never showed up on a motor show stand covered in spotlights. But it carried the sick, carried the messages, chimed through the summer streets, gave families a place to sleep under the stars, and supported the small enterprises of a country in recovery. It was the foundation of post-war Britain, invisible, unacknowledged, and very necessary. Now that you are aware of its history, you could have a little different perspective the next time you see one of the remaining few at a rally or tucked away in a barn. Not as a relic. Not because I'm curious. But I saw Britain for what it was and what it wanted to be.